Here about coaching adolescents with ADHD, and by popular demand we have him back. He is a coach in Broomfield Hills. He specializes in working with teenagers who are having academic problems, but he also has written a book on video game addiction recovery, and he's given talks on this topic. And so today he's going to talk to us about video game addiction recovery. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Well, as it says, I have no affiliation or financial interest in research support, but I am open to any of those things. So if anybody has some connections, please come forth now or see me after the show. Okay, so video game addiction, a recovering junkie, that's me, helps you understand. So just as a show of hands today, how many here are here as healthcare professionals? How many here are here as parents? How about both? Okay, and is there anybody that kind of feels that they may have some addiction problems with video games? Okay, we got one. It's okay, whatever is said here stays here, so you have no fear of retribution. Okay, so let's begin. I'm going to try to give you an overview of what I like to call the video game universe. I'm going to give you an overview of what it looks like when video games become troublesome in the lives of young people, teens, and adults. It's not just teens and young people. And some possible solutions. And before I say that, I think probably in an hour today, the solution that we're going to cover most adequately is awareness. Because as you know, from any addiction recovery model, awareness is the first step. You have to know that there's a problem, and you have to know what that problem looks like and be able to identify it. So, video gaming is the primary source of entertainment for tens of millions of Americans. Okay? It's not just an occasional amusement, it's a primary source of recreation and amusement. Annual sales are, they have final figures aren't out yet, but probably around 30 billion in 2008, and actually it's a little higher, which is odd because we're in the middle of a recession, and yet the video game industry saw gains last year, significant ones at that. Children are more likely to play video games than they are to play organized sports. 44 hours a week. That's the screen time. That includes computer, video game consoles, and television. That's what our young people are doing. 44 hours in front of a screen. So, it should come as no surprise, 83% of American children own at least one video game console. Many own several. Well, I'm going to play PlayStation 2 today because I want to play some old school games for a change. Okay, so many kids have multiple video game systems. And when I was younger, I'm 39, but when I was younger, it was only young people that played Atari and Pong and some of these games. But now, the average age of video gamers is 33. Because a lot of adults are playing as well. So, before we go into all the problems, I want to say that video gaming is not all bad. There are some advantages to it, and we're going to go into some of those. But a lot of people, like me, we are not responsible enough with video games to do it in a responsible and healthy way. So here are some advantages. First of all, people who play video games, and there's a lot of studies to support this. I don't just make blanket statements. Visual and spatial acuity can be developed by virtue of playing video games. Eye-hand coordination can be developed from playing video games. Here's one that's interesting, and this was a study, I believe it was done at Syracuse University. They followed several hundred doctors who performed laparoscopic procedures, appendectomies with a laparoscope, gallbladder removal. And they had two groups. They had one group that was assigned to play 2 hours on a certain video game every day, and the other group was assigned simply to not play video games. And the surgeons who played video games completed the procedure in 33% less time, and they made fewer mistakes. Now, it should come as no shock. If you play video games and you're good at it, and you're doing a surgical procedure that requires you to use your hands to watch a screen to manipulate an instrument inside of a body, it makes perfect sense that that might be, those might be complementary skills. A friend of mine's name is Mike Davis, and Mike is a guy who's a retired professor, and he's part of a group called the Defense Strategic Initiative Organization. And what he does is he writes articles on the state of our strategic defense and readiness and so forth. And so he tours installations, military installations around the country. And last year he was in California at a certain Air Force base, and he walked through this battlefield monitoring arena, and there were, I think he said 30, 18 to 20-somethings essentially controlling Predator drones in Afghanistan from what looks very similar to a video game interface in Southern California. And so I think you're going to find that a lot of the military is going to rely on the skills and abilities of video gamers in the future. You know, for example, there's a game called America's Army. Is anybody familiar with this? The U.S. Army has made a game where, you know, you can play a medic. You can play the Humvee gunner. You can play a variety of roles, and you have to train for it. And so the game is teaching people. And the U.S. military realizes that video game adepts are increasingly finding themselves in the military, and so they're taking advantage of that as a recruitment tool. I have a young man who came to see me, and he's now 20, and he's still in Iraq right now. One of those guys that Dr. Rob and I were talking earlier. He's one of those guys that would stay up till 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning in high school playing World of Warcraft, not doing very well in school. When mom would take the computer away, he would go into angry fits, I suppose is the best way to characterize them. He's in Iraq. He's basically doing battlefield monitoring over there, and he is now a Lance Corporal, and he listed some of the jobs that he's trained for when he gets out, and he's going to come out commanding a salary of $60,000 to $70,000 a year at 22 years of age because of his training in the military. So the military has allowed that video game-oriented young man to thrive in a way that high school never could. So there are success stories out there. Unfortunately, that young man piddled away any chance at becoming educated when he was in high school. So there's a distinct downside, obviously, as well. By the way, folks, a couple things. I'm going to give you my website before we're done. And these slides will be available on my website. Now, the one thing I say is my computer guy, who normally handles it, is out of town for a week. But my assistant here, Alan, who's helping me today, he may get them up if we can figure out how to access the site, number one. Number two, I do have a book, and my agent believes we're still going to get a major publisher, so I haven't published it yet. But anybody here that wants to see the book, I'm happy to send you the manuscript. All you got to do is email me, and I'll provide you with that at the end of my presentation here today. Also, periodically I'm going to stop and I'm going to take questions, because this is a lot of you, I know, maybe you have people that exhibit some of these behaviors, and we're just going to go and talk a little bit, and I don't want the questions to bubble too long. So while we're at it, is there anybody that has a question or anything that's bubbling up or a comment that they might like to make at this point? Good, we're moving on. Okay, all right, I guess we already went over that, didn't we? Okay, we're going on to the next slide. All right, so obviously there are positives to video gaming, but there are some serious negatives. So some of you, raise your hands again if you had family members. Okay. All right, anybody have a husband or a wife? Okay, good. So what you'll find is that the video game addict, now I realize that addict is a loaded word. It's a word that I'm comfortable with given the behaviors that I've witnessed, but some of you may not agree, and that's okay. But the video game addict, well, one of the first signs is they will turn away from friends and family. Okay, they'll stop. This is similar to any model of addiction. Turn away from friends and family, and the activities that they once enjoyed will take a back seat. as the video gaming increasingly takes the front seat. Okay? So that's something to watch out for. Very simple. Is that person turning away from other activities that were once enjoyed in favor of video games?